with respect to the cardiovascular disease that you mentioned, and you talk about this in the book as well, there's a statistic that I've read from the National Health Statistics website, which is that every 33 seconds, someone dies from cardiovascular disease in the United States. So when people hear the word cardiovascular disease, I mean, at least even me, the cardiovascular disease, what is that? What does it mean? Where does atherosclerosis come into play? Where does coronary heart disease? What is cardiovascular disease?
I mean, you could define it very broadly and include valvular disease and cardiomyopathies and all of those things. But when we talk about ASCVD, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, which is the leading cause of death in the United States and globally, it's leading cause of death for men and women. What we're referring to is the disease of coronary arteries that leads to ischemia. And, just to take a step back for a moment, when you think about all of these chronic diseases, which I'm sure we'll get into today, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases, et cetera, things that you and I have spoken about a lot, including when you were on my podcast, it's important to understand that this is the disease for which we have the clearest understanding. So, our understanding of what initiates and propagates cancer is very small compared to our understanding on the cardiovascular front. Our understanding of this on the neurodegenerative side is also quite small. There are still many things we don't understand. So, everything we're about to talk about on the cardiovascular side should be at least thought of in the context of how wonderful is it that we understand these things, because we have the most tools for prevention here. So with that said, what we're really talking about that does the lion's share of killing, and again, I'll bracket for a moment that there are other things. There are people that are dying from, cardiomyopathies. There are people that are dying from valvular cardiovascular disease and things of that nature. But the majority of what's happening is a disease that leads to plaque formation inside of coronary arteries. And we can go as deep or as shallow as you want into that and why that happens and how that's a function of endothelial injury, lipoprotein burden, and inflammation. But this leads to a reduction in blood flow to key parts of the heart muscle. And when that happens, the heart undergoes an ischemic event. Now, sometimes that can be chronic and sometimes that can be acute. And if an acute event occurs in a region where enough muscle of the heart is compromised, that's going to result in sudden death. That's a heart attack. And it's important to understand that when I was in medical school, it was more than 50%. It's now a little less than 50%, but it's still a very high number. A little less than 50% of people's first brush with a symptom of coronary artery disease is sudden death. That's worth repeating because I still remember being asked this question in medical school. You're sitting there as a first year medical student in cardiovascular pathology class, and the pathologist said, what's the single most common presenting feature for someone having cardiovascular disease the first time? And everyone was like, chest pain, shortness of breath, rattling off all the usual stuff. He goes, no, sudden death. Again, today it's not quite 50%, but that's a very sobering statistic.
Absolutely. I do want to dive into some of the major causes of the atherosclerosis and the atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease that you're talking about. So lipoproteins you mentioned, and most people know, they hear about lipoproteins, right. They hear about LDL or HDL, but ApoB. Why should people know about ApoB?
Well, again, I think it's worth maybe just getting everybody on the same page with cholesterol. Let's start with that, right? So everybody's heard of cholesterol, and I think most people would probably even have kind of a negative valence when they think about it. It's like cholesterol is a bad thing. So it's worth explaining that that's not really true, right? Cholesterol is an essential thing, right? So without cholesterol, we wouldn't be alive. And there are really rare, fortunately, genetic conditions in which cholesterol synthesis is compromised, and those tend to be fatal in utero. So if an organism can't make enough cholesterol, it ceases to exist, because cholesterol is the thing that gives every cell fluidity, the membrane of every cell fluidity, and it's the precursor to some of the most important hormones we make. So in the case of us as humans, right, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, cortisol, these essential hormones are all made from cholesterol. So every cell in the body, with the exception of red blood cells, makes plenty of cholesterol. The lion's share of it is probably done by the liver and the striatal tissues. And we have to figure out a way to move this stuff around the body. And the highway system of the body is the blood. And the blood, of course, is water. So if we want to move things that are water soluble throughout the body, like proteins and ions, it's easy because they dissolve freely in water and they move around. But when you want to move something around water that is not water soluble, such as cholesterol as a lipid, you have to wrap it in something that is water soluble. And that something is the lipoprotein. And the big protein on the surface of that sphere is called an apolipoprotein.